It's time to talk Houston Texans football on the Ourlads Football Network for the OFN today on this Friday. What is it, the 10th of February, as we get closer and closer to the NFL draft, even though the Super Bowl hasn't even hit us, which is on Sunday. But there are a lot of fan bases out there outside the two on Sunday that are already looking forward to the NFL draft. One of them, the Houston Texans. And whenever we talk Houston Texans football, we look forward to welcoming in Cole Thompson from Fan Nation. Cole, good to have you back. Thanks for doing this again.
Hey, Tom, I'm glad to be back on the show. I'm glad to be able to talk a little bit more Texans, and I'm really excited to be able to talk about the future of this organization because this time around it actually feels like there's a bright light at the end of the tunnel.
Yes, and I kind of felt the same way a couple of years ago with Detroit when you could see that they just started to hire the right people in charge. And so now Houston, I'm not sure. Look, maybe it did start with Caserio. He just needed to find his right guy. We knew the last couple were just kind of holdovers. So this is a legitimate coaching candidate. So how excited is the fan base to get DeMeco Ryans in tow?
There was a point during the middle of the process where we were doing our interviews and trying to figure out, was there a secondary option who was potentially also going to be in the running? And once DeMeco Ryans had that first interview, the entire fan base said, nope, we're done. We're getting DeMeco Ryans or we're not going to be happy. And as selfish as that was from them, I completely understand where they're coming from. This is a guy that has built a repertoire throughout the NFL, not as a coach, but as a person. Very likable inside locker rooms, very much a proponent of developing talent and taking talent from days 3, rounds 4, round 6, round 7, and turning them into quality players who fit a mold of a defense that is very, I won't say constructively hard, but does have some tidbits to make it a little bit more challenging. They run a lot of 5-2 fronts. They run a lot of nickel and dime formations to where you have to be versatile in the scheme. And you ask a lot out of every single one of your players. Your defensive linemen are asked to do a lot. Your linebackers are asked to do a lot. Your secondary players are asked to be multi-purposeful. So I think when you add all that to the conversation, it really is just a good fit in terms of just personality-wise, because you're going to have to be able to get along with this guy. But then you look at his production on the field, there's a reason why he was the hottest coordinator on the market. Number 1 defense this past year in total yards allowed, number 1 in scoring, top 5 in run defense, top 5 in third down conversions allowed, top 3 in red zone defense. He fits what Houston needs. And I think that what people are looking at is, the quarterback position, the quarterback position, the quarterback position. Well, at the same time, it becomes a lot easier for you to improve as a unit once you guys start finalizing like where your strengths are. And it feels like at this moment right now, the strengths for Houston are on the defensive side of the football. You have Derek Stingley in coverage. You have Jalen Petrie at the safety position, Christian Harris. You have Jonathan Grenard. These are cornerstone pieces that you want to be able to build around. So to be able to have a guy like DeMeco Ryans come in, spend 2 or 3 years really developing them while adding in more talent and bringing in his type of personnel and players that fit his system really benefits Houston in the long run. I would not be shocked after this year if they finish as a top 12 defensive unit, and in 2 years from now, if they finish as a top 5 unit. That's how talented they are. That's how much I think that you're going to see the emphasis put on the defensive side. And I think that's going to be a really step in the right direction for an organization that has won 11 games in the last 3 years.
Yeah, nowhere to go but up. So before we talk about the roster, let's run through the rest of the key staff jobs that need to be filled. And from what outsiders are saying, so Matt Burke, is he going to be the coordinator? It's
almost a done deal.
Okay,
they're working on the finalization of the contract right now. So
is it going to be? Do you know whether Burke will run the defense as far as calling the plays and so forth?
No, that's still up for debate.
Okay.
DeMeco did say, though, at his press conference, everything was up on the table. He would be willing to be more of a CEO if it benefited the organization. Burke does come very highly from J.J. Watt. Watt spoke immensely about him and what his production was on the defensive line. He has worked with multiple defensive linemen. Chandler Jones had some of his best seasons underneath Matt Burke. And it does feel like for an organization that finished bottom 5 in pressures, bottom 5 in sacks bottom 5 in sacks, bottom 5 in missed tackles, you got to be able to get a guy who understands defensive line. And it was why Chris Kasarik, the defensive line coach for San Francisco, I thought was very much in the conversation for the running because he understands how to develop really quality front playmakers that set the tone for the second and third level defense.
And with Kingsbury getting the interview, that seems like a no-brainer. Do you think he'll eventually get the job?
It'll be interesting. I think that the main thing that you're going to want to look at is salary structure number one. He just was fired from an organization, doesn't really need the money. So is he looking for a second opportunity? He is from Texas, so there is that ties. He did coach in College Station at Texas A&M. He also coached at Houston for a little while, so he has connections to the
Texas
713
Tech.
area code. Yeah, and he is a Texas Tech alum, and then also was the head coach there underneath Patrick Mahomes. Can't believe that. Can't believe that you have that talent and you can't do anything with it. But bygones be bygones.
Yeah.
The interesting part will be how do they correlate the offense? Because the one thing that we know about anything from a Kyle Shanahan offense, if he believes in two coordinators, he does not have an OC. What he does is he calls the plays, and then he has a pass game coordinator and a run game coordinator. Is that going to be something that is brought to the table for Houston underneath DeMeco Ryans? Or will Ryans look to just allow the offensive coordinator to run the show? If he wants to hire a run game coordinator, a pass game coordinator, he could. But there's been multiple names linked to the job. Troy Walters out with Cincinnati has been one. There was another offensive, I think it was an offensive line coach that had an interview with them. So the opportunity is wide open right now for offensive coordinator. But it does feel like if Cliff Kingsbury's on the market and he's interested, whether or not you believe that he's a good head coach,
of course,
I like his offensive system. And I think his offensive system for a young organization featuring guys like John Mechie, featuring Nico Collins, Damian Pierce. They want to add in probably another running back. And whoever they put in as a quarterback at either number 2 or number 12 in the NFL draft, it benefits them for the long run. And quarterback development is going to be the really big key here. And I think that's one thing that, whether or not you like Cliff Kingsbury as a person, he has gotten decent play out of quarterbacks wherever he's been.
Speaking of the quarterback position and those 2 draft picks, we just did our first mock draft, Dave Syverson from our lads and I, and our picks, well, obviously without trades, and whether there is a trade or not, Houston is in perfect position to get one of the top 2 quarterbacks. So obviously we went with Bryce Young there. And then with the next pick, we decided to go with an edge rusher, the kid from Texas Tech, Tyree Wilson. Do you think that everybody knows that the quarterback position is the big spot, obviously, at number 2? If they stand pat and they go 212, what do you think about that second pick? Do you think edge rusher and what else?
I've said for a while edge rusher. Like, as much as I think that people want to look at the wide receiver market because of there's not that many promising names out there, there's also, in my personal opinion, based off what I've watched on the film, not that much of a drop off from wide receiver 1 to wide receiver 5. And you could easily target a Josh Downs from UNC, potentially a maybe not Jordan Addison, but potentially maybe a Jackson Smith-Njigba in a trade up from Ohio State. I really like Marvin Mims from Oklahoma in round 3. There's definitely talent. Jalen Hyatt from Tennessee, Cedric Tillman from Tennessee, that could be available at the start of round 2, where you can't really say the same about the defensive line and the defensive end. So I think that a lot of people try and focus in on what the immediate need is when you have to also look at the long-term needs. One of the main reasons why everyone linked Jordan Davis to the Texans last year was because they realized that this defensive line class was not as strong as in years past. You have Jalen Carter from Georgia, absolutely going to be a top 5 pick. I think Brian Bresee is getting a little bit more hype because of where he went to college. I would probably say he's more so a top 40 selection rather than the top 30 selection. And then you have Siaka Ika from Baylor, who is a phenomenal pass rushing defensive tackle. But then you have flaws at every single level. So if you can get a defensive lineman, not Brian Bresee, but maybe if you trade back and go ahead and grab him, or trade back and maybe go get Siaka Ika, I could see that. Pass rusher would make a lot of sense. This is an offense that loves to utilize tight ends. I feel like it's still a little too early for Michael Mayer out of Notre Dame, but if they were going to target a tight end, Mayer might be the safest prospect out there. They also are a very run-oriented team, and even though you have Damian Pierce on the roster and had a phenomenal rookie season, if you fall in love with Bijan Robinson, is it too early when he is an elite talent in itself? I personally don't think so. And I wouldn't be shocked if they also go with an offensive lineman. They are looking to upgrade, I think, the pass protection. Peter Skoronski from Northwestern would be a really interesting fit here because he can play both right tackle and right guard. Yep. And Titus Howard benefited last year from going back to right tackle, and I think that he proved his worth of being a right tackle. But if you do see better play from Skoronski at right tackle, he does have experience playing right guard. So it allows you to go into camp with the battle. And if you can't come to a long-term agreement, because this will be the final year of Howard's rookie contract, then you have your plug-and-play right tackle going into 2024 and beyond.
Okay, let's break down because there's no question when you're in this spot, like you said, the 3-year span, no, hardly any wins to show for it. There's needs all across the board.
You got to build a foundation. Like
Yes.
that's the main thing. Like you can't have a good house when you have a rocky foundation. So you got to be able to put those blue chip pieces into place right now, and that comes in free agency as well.
And that's why I completely agree. And look, we're seeing it in the NFL, especially with the Eagles. You could say the same with the Chiefs, but especially with Philly, starts up front on offensive line and defensive line. And usually that's where it starts when you're trying to rebuild the team anyway. Obviously, the first step is a quarterback. Let's talk about that. So I'm sure there were a lot of Houston fans that were pretty upset with that last win of the season, not being able to control their own destiny, but it is what it is. So they still have the opportunity to get the second quarterback, and that all depends. I mean, I don't think Chicago is going to not trade that pick. It's just going to be too enticing. But if something happens and they keep the pick and Houston winds up getting the opportunity to pick the top of two quarterbacks, let me ask you, is Bryce Young definitely the guy? And if Bryce Young does get taken number one by whoever comes up possibly, or if Chicago takes him, CJ Stroud, is he definitely locked in as the consolation prize?
It's challenging because I have my own theory on this personally, which a lot of people in Texas hate and a lot of people don't agree with me, but
okay.
never mind. It's fine.
Give it to me.
So if Bryce Young is there at number 2, you take Bryce Young.
Yes.
I think that Bryce Young, from a mentality standpoint, it literally the only flaws that you see in his game are flaws that he can't control. It's his height, and it is probably his weight. And weight fluctuates. He's trying, according to people that I spoke to get up to about 215 pounds. Unfortunately, you can't grow overnight, which is probably the only reason why we're not saying he is the clear-cut number 1 pick in this year's draft. But I talked to a scout not too long ago. They said that he already has top 10 pocket awareness. His ability to read defenses, feel the pressure, and the pocket collapse allows him to really keep himself upright, and then it allows him to stay healthy behind a line of scrimmage, which is a huge benefit when you are 5'9", 5'10". The arm strength is there. The continuity and the consistency passing is there. I think that he does a really good job reading the field. He limits his turnovers. He has great footwork. He has great vision downfield to be able to go through his progression very fast and then be able to make the right reads. He doesn't also really second guess himself. I think that's one of the biggest benefactors of being a quarterback like Bryce Young is that once you go through your progression, you have to trust your gut. And 9 times out of 10, his gut is right. There's a reason why he finished as number 1 in the Heisman voting. There's a reason why his touchdown to interception ratio is, I think it's 5-1 in his last 2 years. There's a reason why he was able to go beat the living dog crap out of Kansas State, was because he just trusted his gut. And Kansas State plays a very physical style of defense underneath Chris Kleiman. So I look at all that. I look at his SEC experience. I feel like that he has to be the pick at number 2, even if you are a little bit concerned with the offensive line. That's why you go ahead and you build an offensive line. You brought up that Philadelphia and Kansas City win because of what they've done in the front lines. I've always said offense wins games, but trenches win titles. So you got to have to win in the trenches if you want to be able to win anything. That's a good thing. If you're not in love with CJ Stroud, I think you can do one of two things. And I honestly believe that both would not be wrong. I would not be shocked because you have a defensive-minded coach wanting to fix a front 7 that ranked bottom 5 in run defense, ranked dead last in yards allowed per contact, allowed number 1 in missed tackle rate at the line of scrimmage, all of that. Jalen Carter from Georgia and Will Anderson from Alabama both would make a lot of sense. It would allow you to fortify your defensive line. You're not going to be able to find talents like these, I think, in rounds 2 and round 3. And then what you would do is you would have to trade back up into the top 10. And Nick Caserio is very aggressive when it comes to making these moves. Last season, he traded away a 4th-round pick and a 5th-round pick and the 2nd-round pick to move up to go grab John Mechie at 44. He did the same thing to get Christian Harris from Alabama at 75. So I could see where he gets aggressive. Anthony Richardson has a lot of tools that you like in a quarterback. And everything that you can see from him, if you get the right offensive coordinator in the building, he will develop into one of the premier prospects at the position. I know that it's a big reach, but again, you look at teams like Buffalo, they took a reach when they brought in Brandon Beane, and then they eventually just started to build around Josh Allen. I don't think they regret the decision. When you brought in Joe Burrow, and then Burrow tore his ACL, and Burrow said, listen, I want to get my number 1 wide receiver from college. I promise you I'll be fine. Nobody's complaining about it in Cincinnati anymore. And you look at Patrick Mahomes taking a year to learn underneath Alex Smith and become more of a dynamic unit. The difference between the Chiefs and the Texans is Houston knows that they're nowhere near ready to be a contender. Kansas City realized we can be a contender this season with Alex Smith, but we can be a legitimate Super Bowl prowess dynasty with Patrick Mahomes if we just give him time. It's the same adjustment, though. You realize that they're not ready in year one, but what you do is you allow them to learn and develop underneath the quarterback coach, one of the people that Mahomes thanks a lot, and part of the reason he was brought back in was Matt Nagy. They thought that Matt Nagy's development with him and Alex Smith in the locker room allowed him to immediately go make strides at the quarterback position once he took over in the starting role. I think it'd be the same thing. Now, again, it has to be the right offensive coordinator. I think you have to give reins to offensive coordinator to decide what he wants to do. Stroud is an excellent pick. I actually thought that Stroud may end up being my QB1 just based off of his size, his arm strength, his vision, his pocket awareness. His game against both Utah and Georgia in the Rose Bowl and in the College Bowl playoff is enough for me to say that anybody who says that his pocket awareness is weak doesn't watch enough film, because of he may have had some downfalls, but in games against two of the best front sevens in college football the last 2 years, the fact that he was only sacked, I think, 3 total times in both games combined shows that he has been able to feel the pressure. He's able to step up, and he's able to deliver clean, quick strikes. It's a good place to be if you're Houston. But if you're not in love with him and you believe that you can get something out of Will Levis or Anthony Richardson, or maybe even trade up to go get CJ Stroud later on, it's worth having a conversation, because this isn't a team that is nowhere near close on the defensive side where you feel comfortable just taking a quarterback and saying, okay, we'll just go ahead and take our guy at 12 and call bygones to be bygones.
No, not when you have, like you said, premier talent like Carter and Anderson to choose from. That does become a question. It shouldn't be that easy, especially when you take a look at this. This is clearly a rebuilding job, and next year there's going to be even more top elite quarterback talent. So whether or not it's okay, we don't believe in CJ Stroud for whatever reason, but no, we're not going to be forced to take Richardson if we don't want him. We're not going to be forced to take Levis if we don't want him. We got quarterbacks next year that we can go with. So let me ask you, and we'll know that before the draft because we have free agency first. So do you envision in any way Houston going out and making a move at all for a legitimate starting free agent quarterback?
No, and I think that, unfortunately, and it really comes down to this, if you're Nick Caserio, you have no leg to stand on. You have to get a quarterback at this point, in my opinion, because of you will not be here if you finish with another 4-13 okay. record and your team continues to diminish and not put up the offensive production. You sign a 6-year contract if you're DeMeco Ryans because you want that stability. Basically, when you look at the payment and what the payout would have been for David Culley and for Lovie Smith, they were both on 4-year contracts. So the 6-year deal all but guarantees you at least 2.5, if not 3 full seasons before they start having those conversations of, will you be on the hot seat? Will you be let go after the season? So that was a major facet for a guy like DeMeco Ryans to come into the building, where you're already on year 3 and you'll be going on year 4 of the Nick Caserio era very soon. How does that benefit you? I understand that the Deshaun Watson trade hovered around your head for year 1. You've done a decent job drafting talent year 2, but you have to be able to land at least somewhat productivity. And I remember when Deshaun was traded last year after, in March, we went into the building and Nick said that this past season was not going to be a year where they would look to rebuild. They'd look to go be splashy in free agency because of all the dead cap money and all the space that they would have to make up for. But this upcoming year, which is 2023, they were going to start getting aggressive. And it really does start by adding in players. You don't need to go ahead and get 5 top 15 players on, Pro Football Focus's top free agent list. But it's just showing that Jerry Hughes, who is a phenomenal pass rusher at age 33 and had a breakout year, isn't your key free agent signing. It's that Christian Kirksey coming back on a 2-year deal is not the highlight signing of the offseason. You have to be able to make a little bit more of a splash than that. And I think that you also have to look at bringing in a quarterback. And the only way to where I don't think that they bring in a quarterback is if DeMeco Ryans says, I do not like any of these options. I would rather run it back and see what we have with Davis Mills for another year. We know that we're about a year or 2 away from really taking the next step forward. Let's just go ahead and add in as much talent as possible as blue chip players for when we do get our quarterback we like. Drake May, Quinn Ewers, Caleb Williams, whoever breaks out, because there's always going to be one that breaks out every single year and jumps from being a mid-3rd round pick to top 10 selection. When we get that guy to come in the building, then we're that much closer of being a viable contender. And we will have him for 5 years to where we want to pay him. So the free agent market is just really rocky. I could see them maybe going after like a Jacoby Brissett or something like that if they really feel comfortable with, getting a guy like a Richardson or a Levis that they don't trust right away. But outside of that,
okay,
Davis Mills, I think, is a fine backup option. I think that he can start for you in a pinch. I think the organization likes that. They still have a good rapport with Jeff Driscoll. I think that they would love to bring Jeff back on the practice squad. And then if they have to elevate him to make him the number 3 quarterback, they would do so for running plays. But it just feels at this moment, unless DeMeco is the one making the final decision, they're not going to be able to go into this offseason without getting a quarterback in the draft.
And by saying that, though, to me, then what that means is chances are they're going to have to draft C.J. Stroud.
Or they would have to go trade back, or they'd have to fall in love with
Well, here's
Levis
what I'm saying,
something.
though. Because if you draft Richardson or Levis, those guys can't start next year. They're not ready. So, therefore, if they're not ready in 2023, then you might as well just wait till 2024.
It's not that I don't think Richardson is ready.
No. I don't think Richardson is ready, and a lot of people don't think he. There's no way Anthony Richardson is ready to play NFL football right now.
I personally believe with the right offensive system, he could be game ready by about week 7 or week 8 in the regular season. And at that point, if you feel comfortable by week 8, giving him an opportunity just to see where he's at, that's a huge win for you. Levis, I do not have a first-round grade on. I actually think
I agree.
I think Hendon Hooker is a much more productive and NFL-ready quarterback right now than Levis. Even though he's 25 and is coming off a torn ACL, I would take him before I would take Levis in that situation. But yeah, I mean, if you're hell-bent on moving off Davis Mills and you're hell-bent on getting a starting quarterback week 1, then CJ Stroud has to be your guy. But if you're not and you're okay with being
good.
Then you can do the Anthony Richardson pathway.
Those good points. Okay, so taking a look at the rest of the team now, you mentioned a wide receiver unit and Brandon Cooks. So contractually, is he just stuck here for another one more season?
So he has 2 more years left on the deal, so he'll be through 2024 on the contract, but he's owed $36 million over those next 2 years and $18 million in guaranteed contract salary next year. So it becomes challenging because I guarantee you that there will be teams willing to take on that contract for a 5th-round pick, for a 6th-round pick. How do you benefit for a 6th-round pick? Where the way that I think Houston is going to have to play this, currently they have about $37.5 million in salary cap space. It's the 5th most in the NFL. I would not be shocked if they were willing to eat part of that contract to garner a little bit more interest. And again, you're a rebuilding team. You feel like that you could use more the picks than you could the player and the prospect. So if you're willing to say eat $7 million of that contract and it goes from $18 million to $11 million, does that come now to a 3rd-round pick? And does that 3rd-round pick allow you to bring in a more precedent wide receiver that could be an immediate factor? When you look at, maybe you eat up $5 million, is that worth the 4th-round pick? And then how many teams are aggressive enough, depending on where they are in the regular season after free agency, to bring in a number 1 receiver? Dallas is probably going to be the first team that everyone looks at. They don't have a lot of salary cap space to where they can go spend in top-tier money. They're going to have to franchise tag Tony Pollard and Dalton Schultz. I don't think that they're franchise tagging Schultz. I think that they will franchise tag Tony Pollard. Do you feel like adding in a Juju Smith-Schuster or a DJ Chark makes you that much better of a proponent opposite of CeeDee Lamb, where because if he's been in this role before, Brandon Cooks does. If they're willing to eat up $6 million of the contract, are you willing to go with the 3rd-round pick? And I think that's where the conversation kind of starts with a guy like BC.
And you think that could happen this offseason?
Oh, he will not be back in Houston.
He's gone.
From every conversation that I've had, Caserio will work due diligently to move him to another team, probably a contender. They could have a player and pick swap. You could figure out how you're going to figure out the salary cap structure. But I would say 99.9% shot Brandon Cooks is not in the uniform for the Texans next year.
And therefore, of course, there comes the especially with the depth, because you have Mechie and Collins. Do you look at Mechie and Collins as really good 2s and 3s that Houston needs to find their 1?
Yeah, but at the same time, the only way you find your 1 is via trade in this year. And that, because of I actually can't even say that you can put Mechie out on the field right now, because Mechie didn't play last season. He was on the NFI list due to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. He has been cleared of non-Hodgkin's, which is a blessing in its own self. But everything is about him working back. So he hasn't played football in over a year.
True.
He was coming off a torn ACL.
Yep.
You're banking on what you saw before the torn ACL and knowing that his health could be a concern moving forward. And players have retired because of having non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Even though it is very curable and it's very treatable, you have to play with the thought of maybe he's nothing more than a depth piece for us. And bygones be bygones. At the time we didn't know this. Yeah. At the same time, I look at the receivers both in the draft and I look at the receivers both in the free agent market. Every one of them is a number 2. Like Jordan Addison will be paired as a number 1 on most rosters. I think he would be a phenomenal elite number 2 receiver. I think the same thing about Jalen Hyatt. I think the same thing about Marvin Mims or Josh Downs. They are players who really benefit on being part of rosters that have a complementary number 1 receiver already in place. And people out there always say, oh, well, number 2 receivers are just dime a dozen. Well, no, the 2 teams that played in the AFC Championship game had 2 1,000-yard receivers. I mean, the NFC Championship game had 2 1,000-yard receivers. Cincinnati has T. Higgins, who would be a number 1 on just about every roster besides maybe 5 or 6. Brandon Ayuk is the number 2 in San Francisco. He would be about the number 1 on about 15 to 16 rosters. Like, there's reasons why having a benefactory number 2 weapon is good for your team. But Houston has maybe that number 2 in a guy like Nico Collins, where if they were to go out and maybe add in a DJ Chark, you'd have to spend a little bit more money to bring him in, but that would be your vertical presence. Maybe he'd be your number 2, then you get your number 3, and then in 2024, you really got to spend on a guy like a T. Higgins if he hits the open market, which I don't think he will, an Ayuk, who am I blanking on? There's another big time name that like Corey Davis doesn't really count in that kind of conversation.
Really.
There's another name that I'm blanking on that's going to hit the open market next year that like Houston would have to be like all in to pay for, and they could because of they actually have the number 3 salary cap space that season. So like that's a huge plus for them. But that's where kind of the conversation is that you can add in receivers. I would have no doubt, and I expect them to get aggressive. Jacoby Myers is going to be one that's linked to them because of his ties with Nick Caserio in New England. I wouldn't be shocked if they were willing to flaunt out the money, but that's a very complimentary number 2.
That's all he is. Yeah.
DJ Chark is a really, really good number 2.
Number 2.
Where I think that he could be a number 1 in this offense because of his vertical presence, but that doesn't intimidate you the way that a Jamar Chase does or that a AJ Brown does. And last season, you saw that teams were aggressive to go get that number 1 receiver. And unfortunately, I thought part of the reason why Houston really struggled, and I thought that they should have just been more aggressive to move up in the draft, was because of they knew that there was going to be a drop-off at receiver this year. And Mechie was, the pick at the time, and it was good, and I don't think anybody could doubt that. But if you had an opportunity to maybe go get a Chris Olave, Olave finished with 1,000 yards this past year. Or if you were aggressive to go get a Drake London, London finished with 900 receiving yards this past year. And then I had heard that potentially they were in on Jameson Williams, and then when Jameson got traded at pick number 12 for the trade up with the Minnesota Vikings, that's why they traded down to pick number 15 with Philadelphia, was because they were looking between 3 different players, and Williams was one of them.
Well, a guy who was not supposed to be in the running for the top receiver, though, is the guy that I think has the best, and we agree at our lads, has the best chance to be a pure number 1. That's Quentin Johnson. So the question, though, is we're going to find out in the coming weeks. We're going to find out at the Combine and so forth. There's a lot of work that needs to be done on him outside of TCU, of course. That's not exactly, it's still not the SEC, and it's still not high-level corners he's gone up against. But, he's got the size and the big playability. But like you said, I agree. I just think that especially when you're trying to rebuild a team like Houston, you don't do it with wide receivers. You do it because you have to make sure that you have the proper depth up front. Not just even starters, but depth. You got to go offensive line, defensive line. And when you're taking a look at the offensive line for this team, the tackle situation seems to be solid as long as the team re-signs Tunsil long term. Do you think that's going to happen?
They're going to have to, I think, because they know that he is a focal point for the offense, but also it frees up salary cap space. Like, that's another thing, is that when you restructure his contract and give him an extension, it'll give you more money in the salary cap this year to be a little bit more aggressive and add in more pieces. I don't think that he is the number 1 tackle in the NFL, but I vastly think that he is underrated. Like,
agreed.
People on and every website were saying, oh, he's like the 11th best tackle. Did you watch him this past year? He was number 1 in pass blocking. He allowed, I think, 3 total pressures. He didn't allow a sack. He was very good in run support. The only issue that we've always had with Laremy Tunsil in Houston, and the only issue that Houston's always had, is the penalties. And even the penalties went down this past year. So I think he's worthy of a contract extension. I think that maybe he's going to have to reset the market for offensive tackle, because the problem is, if you allow someone else to sign before, that only ups the ante, and you have a Tyreek Hill situation.
Yeah, that's true.
Hill last year was going to be all in on Kansas City, and then Devontae Adams gets traded, and he goes, "This is not a good enough deal for me. Either trade me or let me go ahead and get paid." Yeah. And they said, "No, we're trading you."
Yeah.
So you have to make this deal happen quicker than I think expected, because if anyone else re-signs to a long-term contract, and there are other tackles that will be up for massive deals this offseason, if you allow that to happen, that only raises the asking price. Yeah. Like, people all the time complain about Dak getting $40 million. And it's like, well, that was the asking price at the time. Like, Daniel Jones is about ready to get paid $35 million. And these are two very different quarterbacks that you'd want on your roster. So it's supply and demand. So the interesting part will be Titus Howard. Because Titus Howard is a player that was not drafted by this regime with Nick Caserio. When David Culley came in, they tried him at offensive guard. He had a lot of struggles. A lot of people thought that maybe he would be on the trade block and they wouldn't pick up his fifth-year option. They ended up doing so. He rebounds and plays right tackle. But what's the asking price for him? What are you trying to get? What kind of deal are you trying to get at? And are you looking for a 3-year contract with a 4th-year option? Are you looking at a 4-year contract with a 4-year contract with a 5th-year option?
Sure.
What's the annual salary? And then how much is that money going to be dictated towards, his contract, to where it affects you when it comes to free agency, not just in 2023, but 2024 and beyond?
Well, at least you got both of these guys for next year. So, and with the hope of maybe re-signing both of them. So does that mean it's pretty simple? What the team needs to do on the offensive line is right there on the interior. And I'm obviously got to ask you about Kenyon Green, because that was a very questionable pick at the time. And he's a rookie. There's been a lot of rookies that have had bad first seasons and have turned things around. Do you see Kenyon Green as one of those guys?
It really just comes down to his pass protection work, because when you look at his numbers in run blocking, he was actually very efficient last year. And that was one of his huge strengths coming out of Texas A&M, was he was a part of an offensive line that really loved to run the football, that knew how to masterfully move the sticks. They had 2 guys in Isaiah Spiller and Devon Achane average over 5.5 yards per play. And there was a reason why he was effective on those type of plays, especially with Dameon Pierce in the backfield. I think that the main thing is going to be hand placement. I think that it's also the NFL speed is going to be another thing that you have to work at. Overall, hand placement is one thing, but also it leads down to penalties. He was credited with, I think, 12 penalties for over 180 yards allowed. So you got to get that number down. Yep. That also plays in with footwork. I think that he probably could help if he'd probably benefit losing a little bit of weight this offseason to make him a little bit more quicker coming out of the breaks. That's really where you have the question mark, is the pass blocking sets. Because in run blocking, there was enough there to feel comfortable with him in the starting role moving forward.
Okay.
And I think also you didn't have a good offensive center to work with him. I think that's because of when you're asking Laremy Tunsil to go one-on-one, then you're asking Kenyon Green to work in a combo block, to where Scott Quessenberry is late coming off the snap, and Jeffrey Simmons and DeForest Buckner and countless other. I'm trying to go. DJ Jones and others are just blowing past you on the line of scrimmage, to where by the time that you have your footwork set, you just are flat on your ass. And I think that upgrading at the center position is going to be a really important factor for Houston. Now, how they do that, I think Garrett Bradbury could be a name for the Minnesota Vikings to watch for. I think Bradley Bozeman, if you're willing to overpay, the Alabama ties are going to be very strong there with DeMeco Ryans. If they draft John Michael Schmitz from Minnesota, I think is the perfect complement, because if he already worked with a 2-time 1,000-yard rusher in Mohamed Ibrahim, he's very good in run blocking.
Oh, yeah.
I think that his pad level is what you're looking for a guy like Kenyon to learn off of. He works in combo blocks extremely well. I would be very hesitant to say that Houston is not doing their homework right now on interior offensive linemen, primarily at center. And I feel like that if they feel comfortable with what they added in at picks number 12 and at picks number 2, and they upgraded with the pass rush and they upgraded with a couple of other positions, it would be very hard to say at 33 John Michael Schmitz is not worth the selection.
Agreed.
Especially for an investment.
Yeah, sure. No, that's and especially because, again, they do have to add a premier player inside, and center makes a lot of sense.
And if you don't, I would say, and if you don't do it at center, you got to do it at right guard. I don't think that AJ Cann is a bad guard. I think that he's a serviceable guard.
That's all. Yeah.
But people vastly underappreciate the center position because if they really do set up the formation beforehand. They're the ones that are calling out audibles. They're the ones that are seeing translations on the defensive line. They're the ones seeing shifts in the linebacking room. So you can't just be a one and done type of guy. Like I remember last year, I kept telling people, if Houston really wanted to draft an interior offensive lineman, they should have gone with Tyler Linderbaum because if Linderbaum was going to be a special talent, I don't think that there was a second center even close to him.
Yep.
And you look at his numbers and his production, there was a reason why he put up immense production and finished as an all-rookie this past year in Baltimore. So the center position is valuable, but you have to have a special player that can play it. Not everyone can just be thrown into the role and say, go ahead and play it.
All right, so, and a tight end and running back we talked about. So bottom line is, even though Pierce played well, if you bring in the San Francisco type of system, fact is you need at least a really solid number 2, even in number 3. There's always going to be depth that's going to be needed across that unit. But that's obviously something you can handle later on in the draft. And tight end, you mentioned that. Houston hasn't really found their elite tight end. I don't know whether or not they've really tried hard enough, taking a look at what they've done in the draft, but and this is a very deep draft for tight ends. So is that really a position that you could see this team using, a third or a fourth round pick on, or maybe even a second round pick?
If they don't fall in love with a guy like a Hayden Hurst or an Austin Hooper, who I don't think needs to be on their radar because they're a little bit older, they have some durability issues, they probably are number 2s. Yeah, going after a guy like probably a Luke Musgraves from Oregon State makes a lot of sense. You can pair him along with Tegan Quintoriano, who'd be your blocking tight end. He would be then more so your receiving tight end. I really like Tucker Kraft out of South Dakota State. I think he's a great route runner. I think he's good after the catch. I think he has great precision when it comes to inline blocking. He is a good fit for what you're looking for in round 3. There's other names out there that could be effective. Cameron Latu out of Alabama, if you're looking for more of a flex option. Darnell Washington, if he's available at 33, that's just a player that you just say, hey, I'll draft him and figure out how to utilize him later.
Sure.
There's not many 6'7" tight ends that win in the red zone and can be that efficient of downfield blockers like him. So I think that his value comes there. You have Dalton Kincaid from Utah is another name. He's been garnering first-round buzz interest. There's a reason why. I do think for this offense, you probably wouldn't want him out there after watching what happened with Tyler Kroft in that game against the NFC Championship where you want him as an inline blocker. But, again, it's one of those classes to where if you do not feel you need to reach for a guy or you're not absolutely in love with him, you don't have to because there's very solid secondary options behind the top 2 guys in Washington and Michael Mayer. And Michael Mayer, in my opinion, is probably one of 3 of the safest prospects in this year's draft class. But just because it's safe doesn't mean you have to go ahead and bring him in because there's other players that maybe have more value later on in the draft and because of it. Running back is interesting because I wouldn't be shocked to see them add in a running back via free agency, but I feel like that if they really want to add in a complementary piece, you got to go ahead and do it via the draft. The 2 ways I look at it is if you're looking for a power type back, Roschon Johnson from Texas makes a lot of sense in rounds 3 or rounds 4 because he's got that physicality, he's got that bruteness, he's great in pass protection. He's also very much like Dameon Pierce where there's not a lot of wear and tear on his tires because he was playing the secondary role behind Bijan Robinson. So lots of scouts love his tape, and a lot of scouts think that he has the ability to be at least quality high-end number 2 running back in the NFL. If you're looking for speed, Texas A&M's Devon Achane makes a bucket load of sense because if he's got that home run hitting mentality, he can catch balls out of the backfield. He was an Olympic track runner, trying at the Olympic trials with the 200-meter dash. He showed last year in the SEC he was durable enough to go up against big front sevens and defensive linemen going up the middle. But the biggest thing is that if you hit the corner and you allow him just to take that edge, it's a foot race, and you lose that foot race 9 times out of 10. Pierce is that thunder. I feel like you need that lightning.
Yes,
I feel like
agreed.
if you really wanted to have like a 3-man set and go all young players, I personally would go with thunder being Dameon Pierce, your middle ground guy being Roschon Johnson, and then I would just go another player that I just absolutely love, and I just say figure out how to use him later is Deuce Vaughn out of Kansas State. I think that his pass rushing skills is great. He's almost impossible to tackle because he's 5'6". If you add him into the mix, it gives you a 3-man rotation to where you feel comfortable. And again, three-man rotations work. Like, everyone focuses in on Miles Sanders this past year and what he did with 1,000 yards, but Kenny Gainwell had a really good season. Boston Scott was a giant killer. They had a good running quarterback in Jalen Hurts. Part of the reason why Philadelphia is so impressive is because they can move the football with multiple players, and each one has a defined role.
Defensively, how many players on defense are considered? You mentioned Petrie and Stingley. So is Okoronkwo, is he part of that future?
He's a free agent that I think that they're going to have a big conversation with on trying to bring him back. The asking price is going to be the main thing. He wants a multi-year deal, and for good reason why. I can imagine him wanting somewhere around $7 million. $7 million is not that bad for a player who late in the year came on very strong and was actually probably the team's most dynamic pass rusher. If they can offer, say, a 3-year $18.5 million deal with a signing bonus that comes with it, or say a 3-year $20 million deal to where it's roughly about $6.5 million. That's a huge win for Houston because he really found his footing, and I do think that he will find his footing like Charles Omenihu did with DeMeco Ryans in the building, especially now that he'll have him.
Yeah, and that's why we went with Wilson with their 12th pick as an edge rusher, because again, if you're starting up front, this team is going to need more edge rushers. So whether or not they do it in the draft or in free agency or a combination of both, give me a couple of players in the front seven that you think are part of the future.
Roy Lopez as a rotational guy is going to be kept around. I think that he'll be a third down type player. Malik Collins' contract at least keeps him in the building for another year.
Okay.
Jonathan Grenard is the hit or miss, and this is where I could think they use the franchise tag if he has a really good year in 2023, because he came on really strong late last season, and then in 2021, and then injuries kept him out from week 5 until roughly about week 16, so he wasn't able to be a guy that finished with double-digit sacks, but maybe he would have been if he was effective and he was healthy for the entire season. So you're banking on his upside, and the organization loves him. They think that he is an absolute standout personality, but they also love what he brings to the table in both a 3-man rush and in a 4-man rush. So I think that he's going to be at least in the conversation. He'll be brought back for sure next season, but if they really think that he benefits and he produces like they expected him to in 2022, next season, you're going to have that contract negotiation talk with him. So I think that he's part of it a little bit. I think Okoronkwo's part of it. I don't think you're going to lose Jerry Hughes. Hughes is a native of Houston. He wanted to come back and play in Houston. And even if you do draft a Tyree Wilson from Texas Tech or maybe a B.J. Ojulari from LSU,
sure,
just having that veteran presence and a guy that's built in the building and been around the you need that. Yes. And I think that as much as you like a guy like Jonathan Grenard, he doesn't have enough experience to where he can be that veteran mentor type B. And again, Hughes had very good numbers last year in a 4-man rush. He led the team in tackles for losses, and he led the team in sacks, and he finished with nearly double digits for the first time since 2016, if I'm not mistaken. So you add that in the building, it allows you to have it. The defensive line, though, is where you have a lot of questions. The interior part.
Yeah, and interior especially.
And that's why so many times people are like, why are you so adamant about considering Jalen Carter? Because this defensive line has nothing up the middle. Like Malik Collins is going to be a free agent after next season. I'm not sure if he doesn't work with this defensive unit, maybe they release him before the start of the offseason. I don't think that they do, but never say never. Kurt Heinisch is probably your next big time name, and that's
not going to get it done.
That's where you have some concerns. Yeah. So if they're going to have to add in a defensive lineman. Lopez for sure, I think, is viewed as a dynamic rotational player, kind of like you would with a who was it a few years ago? Not Sheldon Rankins. There was a guy who played for the New York Jets that I'm blanking on, but they literally said he's a third down defensive lineman. We're putting him in on only this play, and we're willing to pay him this amount of money because of he's really effective against the run. Is
that Jenkins?
No, it wasn't Jenkins. It was it started with a Mick something. I can't believe I'm blanking on it right now.
Okay.
But anyways, that's the type of role I think you'll see with a Roy Lopez. And then definitely I think they're going to look at adding in a pass rusher, and they're going to have to look at adding in an interior defensive lineman. But Grenard and Okoronkwo, I feel like, are two pieces that you're going to try to bring back. Okay. And again, Okoronkwo's all based off contract negotiation. Sure. Like that's really what it comes down to. And he's very much deserved it. I mean, toward the end of the season, he may have been Houston's best defensive player, most consistent defensive player.
And besides Christian Harris, they could look for new linebackers. Not that they probably need a whole lot in this system that they're going to run, but still they got to have at least another impact linebacker, correct?
Yeah, I would say so. I feel like the name that really would make sense if they don't if they draft, which wouldn't be shocking at all in my opinion, because they could easily go just get younger with someone like a Noah Sewell out of Oregon, or potentially a Jack Campbell from
Sure.
Iowa or something like that. But if they really want to try and build something similar to what you have in San Francisco, Azeez Al-Shahir, the third linebacker for San Francisco, is going to be a free agent this offseason.
And I was going to ask you about that. I was going to ask you, what players do you think they might poach off the Niners?
He's probably the first one that I would go after. Him and Samson Akemba, the defensive end, are probably the two.
Okay.
But Azeez Al-Shahir is a name. You're probably going to get him for a very cost affordable deal. I think that maybe $5 million per season gets this done. And a lot of people thought that he had a phenomenal season. According to Pro Football Focus, he, I think, missed only 10% of tackles of his play. He also finished with a run grade of over 85%. So that was one of the highest in the league for secondary linebackers.
Sure.
And what you're looking for is someone to complement Christian Harris. Harris is a space guy. You want him making plays in the open field, where you need somebody who can play the line of scrimmage, go up against the run, and be effective on third down blitzes. I think Al-Shahir fits that a little bit more. So that would be the main target. If you were going to go with another guy, Kazir White, maybe from Philadelphia, would make some sense if he becomes available for a cost-friendly contract. He kind of fits that run-first oriented style. But, yeah, I feel like that linebacker – if they do go in the draft early, the name that I continue to hear that just keeps building up buzz, really making strides, and everyone is going to be focusing in on him at the combine is Arkansas's Drew Sanders. And if Sanders has a good combine and DeMeco wants his general to field and doesn't believe that it is someone like Christian Harris, I would not be shocked if they try and trade back up into the first round to go get Sanders.
Okay. And then, so do you think, how about the secondary? Because there are some other DBs that the Niners are also potentially going to lose. Is the secondary, is it Stingley, Petrie, and that's pretty much it? Everything else is open?
They are going to probably have to look at bringing back Jonathan Owens. He's up for a contract negotiation. Steven Nelson, from what I've been told, wants to get paid a little bit more, and I think that he's deserving so as the number 2 corner. But what you got to look for is what the ask price would be, and also how would that benefit you from freeing up the salary cap. I don't think that Nelson's going to get cut by any means. I think that he will be brought back. The nickel position will be really interesting because if they need to find a way to figure out, do they want to bring back Tavierre Thomas? Do they want to bring back want to bring back Tremont Smith? No, King's on a 2-year deal, so he's in the second year of his 2-year, $7 million contract.
Is he the starting nickel, King?
He's kind of just a Swiss Army knife. They've played him on the outside, they've played him in the nickel, they've played him at free safety a little bit. He basically is like the perfect fill-in for what you're looking for. So Petrie's going to be back for sure. Stingley's going to be back for sure. Bearing a offer that they can't refuse, I feel like Steven Nelson's going to be back for sure, and Desmond King's going to be back for sure. Okay. So your safety position with Jonathan Owens is really the one that you have to worry about at strong safety.
That's the question mark.
And then I think that if you're looking to either extend Nelson or do you trade Nelson, does your secondary corner become another need?
Well, what do you think? Do you think that they're better off re-signing Nelson, or do you think they're better off maybe even using that in the draft or free agency?
I personally think that if they can restructure his contract to give him more money on a 2-year extension, that benefits everybody involved because it would free up salary cap space. I think he fits what this defense is looking for in a number 2 corner, and it allows you to make cornerback a lesser priority in the NFL draft. And any single time that you have veteranship to where you can say, maybe we'll pinpoint and pivot to this next season because we like our situation, it's always a plus. And for a team that has so many needs and not needing one at corner probably could benefit you in the long run.
All right. So overall then, what we're looking at then on defense, though, I think we agree is the main thing is up front, both inside and outside. Those are the 2 big needs for Houston, and quarterback is not only that's the obvious need, but outside of that, you would say wide receiver is the second key need, or would you say center?
If I were going to put it in order of the top 5 needs, quarterback is 1. Quarterback will always be 1 because it's the priority of the position. Interior defensive line is number 2. I think that as much as you would like to see a Will Anderson or a Tyree Wilson or a BJ Ojulari come in, If you can't stop the run up the middle, you're going to be
Sure.
screwed, especially in this defense. I would then probably go with wide receiver at number 3. Wide receiver, you're banking on Nico Collins to finally stay healthy and put up immense
that's true
numbers.
too. Yeah.
You don't really have a good option because you don't know what John Mechie is. I would probably go with center at number 4. I feel like center is a position that just any young quarterback needs to benefit from. They need to have a really good, solid option at that. And then I feel like receiving tight end is number 5 at this point. I think that you can win with Jerry Hughes, Okoronkwo, Grenard. It doesn't mean that you can't benefit from adding in more pass rushing help. But if you could have a very good tight end and you could have somebody who works as both a inline blocker and as a receiver, that benefits everyone involved. And it gives you a security blanket across the middle of the field. Like Dallas Goedert and Travis Kelce are security blankets for Patrick Mahomes and Jalen Hurts. And same thing with Brock Purdy. Like Brock Purdy had George Kittle.
Sure.
Like there's a reason why having a good tight end who can do a little bit of everything
helps
out your organization.
Yep. All right. So last question then before I let you go. If there is a big free agent signing outside your organization, who do you think it is?
If they really want to get aggressive, the 2 names that I would be going after is Tremaine Edmonds from the Buffalo Bills. I feel like that he fits kind of this like thumper style linebacker of the Dre Greenlaw type that would allow Christian Harris to be more so your space linebacker like Fred Warner. That would be the big name, at least at the defensive secondary level. And I'm throwing a bucket load of money at Javon Hargrave. I am doing everything in my power to go ahead and bring in Javon Hargrave for this defensive front. He had a career year, not just in defensive reps when it came to run blocking, but he also finished with 12.5 sacks. He also finished with 25 tackles 25 quarterback hits, 13.5 tackles for losses. And he fits this 4-man rush and also has played every single position on the defensive line, from a 0 tech to a 3-eye tech to a 4 tech to a 2 tech to a 3 tech. So he's just versatile enough to where if you want to run a 5-man defensive front, you can move him and put him over the head of the center. You can put him over the inside shoulder of the guard. You can put him on the outside shoulder of the you can put him on the outside shoulder of the guard and the inside shoulder of the tackle. He just kind of fits everywhere. And he's really good at run defense. And again, this is an organization that needs to get better at run defense up front and overall tackling. And a guy like Hargrave is one of those players where you just throw money at and just bank on it. That's
Eagles may not be able to counter, if the Texans do that.
I don't see a way Hargrave comes back to the Eagles, especially when they added in Milton Williams last year and Jordan Davis this year. They probably feel comfortable with what they have, and they'll just go get a veteran to kind of fill in that void, like they did with Robert Quinn and Ndamukong Suh. It's going to cost you too much, but if I had to say one key free agent signing, the one that I would be going after is Javon Hargrave. I feel like that you have to, just because of you need to set the tone defensively, and especially if you're not going to go defensive line in the draft early.
Cole, great job. Appreciate it. Your Texans coverage at Fan Nation. How often do you spit out articles, and how often do you talk about the Texans on some of your podcasts?
I try to talk about the Texans every day, try to write about them as much as possible. It changes from time to time, based off my schedule, but do as much work, especially in the off season. There's a lot to talk about. Free agency coming up, NFL draft coming up. I'll be in Indianapolis for the Combine, but you can also check me out at Mr. Cole Thompson on Twitter.
I appreciate it, Cole. Look forward to talking to you again sometime around the draft. Enjoy these next few months.
Thanks so much, Greg.